important aspects which have been a development since we discussed this topic last time around in the month of October, and some additional points which might help the members in practice. So I would also like to extend my acknowledgements to Taxmin Publications, Google and TaxSutra for aiding my research and helping me come out with this presentation. So this is going to be the scope for the evening. We're going to discuss few aspects of section 194N, which is TDS on cash withdrawals, which was inserted by Finance Act 2019 as such, and it was amended by Finance Act 2020. There are some small developments with regards to section 194O, which pertains to TDS on payments by e-commerce operators to e-commerce participants. Section 194, which relates to TDS on dividends. In other amendments, I'm going to cover section 194P, which has been a provision inserted by Finance Act 21, which is in the context of TDS to be made in case of certain incomes of senior citizens. Then, of course, we have section 206C1H, which has been causing havoc since the last time it was admitted. It was inserted and became effective from October 2020. To kind of complement it, we have section 194Q, which is TDS in respect of sale of goods, which might be effective from 1st of July 21. Then we have 206AB, which is again a draconian provision which has come into the statute, which is regards the higher TDS in case of non-filers. And this is my scope for the evening. And what I would suggest to all the participants here is, if there are any questions or queries that may arise in the course of discussion, you might please note it down or put it in the chat box, so that we can take all of them towards the end of the session, that is after coverage of these particular provisions. So let's begin with the topic as such. Okay. So section 194N was inserted basically by Finance Act 2019, and it has become effective from the 1st of September 2019. So there is a TDS at the rate of 2% which is required in case the cash withdrawals made by a person are in excess of 1 crore. Now, this section as such was a path-breaking provision given the nature of withholding tax related provisions, because usually we associate the concept of withholding tax or TDS, TCS in the context of expenditure. So this was a path-breaking section in that context, and Finance Act 20 amended it. So the amendment was such that it provided for an proviso which was applicable in the case of non-filers of return of income. So if the assessee has not filed his return of income for the past 3 years, then they gave out a separate threshold criteria in respect of the TDS for the withdrawals made by the assessee. So what is this threshold criteria? So in case the amount of withdrawals exceeded 20 lakhs, but they are less than 1 crore, there was a TDS expected to be done at 2% of the amount withdrawn in excess of 20 lakhs. In case the withdrawals are in excess of 1 crore, the TDS at the rate of 5% has to be made. So this threshold has been introduced, which is only in the context of non-filers of return of income, and the non-filer has been defined as a person rather who has not filed his return of income for the last 3 years, for which the due date for filing return under section 139(1) has expired. So we have kind of discussed this earlier as well. This is nothing new, but I have tried to now incorporate a new illustration which will help us understand the threshold limits per se. So let us have a quick look at this. Mr. A has made the following withdrawals during the financial year 21-22. He has not furnished his return of income for the previous year 17-18, 18-19 and 19-20, the due date for filing of which has already expired. And these are the various amounts which have been withdrawn by the assessee. So on the 1st of August 21, there's a withdrawal of 10 lakhs which has been made. Subsequently, there is 35 lakhs which have been withdrawn in the month of September, 25 lakhs in the month of November, 45 lakhs in the month of January 22 and another 30 lakhs in the month of March 22. So this is how the thresholds will apply or will operate in the context of these withdrawals, because the assessee person who's withdrawing this money has not filed his return of income for the past 3 years in question preceding the year of withdrawal. So for the initial 10 lakhs, there is not going to be any TDS because it is not crossing the threshold of 20 lakhs. In the context of 35 lakhs, which is withdrawn in the month of September, which takes the aggregate amount withdrawn to 45 lakhs, there is going to be a 2% TDS on such amount which is in excess of 20 lakhs. So on 25 lakhs, there's going to be a TDS at the rate of 2%. So which is 50,000 is going to be deducted by the bank. In the month of November, when additional 25 lakhs are withdrawn, it takes the aggregate amount withdrawn to 70 lakhs. Again, excluding the amount on which TDS was made earlier, which is in excess of 20 lakhs, that is 25 lakhs pay, there's going to be a TDS at the rate of 2%. Now, in the month of January, when there is a further withdrawal of 45 lakhs, the aggregate amount which is withdrawn by the assessee till date in that particular previous year comes to be 115 lakhs, so which is in excess of 1 CR. So to the extent it is up to 1 CR, that is the additional 30 lakhs, it is going to be a TDS at the rate of 2%. For the 15 lakh component, which is in excess of 1 CR, it is going to be at the rate of 5%. So the TDS which will be deducted by the bank in question is going to be 1,35,000. Then the last withdrawal of 30 lakhs, which has taken place in the month of March, in that context, it takes your aggregate amount of withdrawal to 145 lakhs. And since it's already crossed the threshold of 5%, there's going to be a 5% TDS on the incremental 30 lakhs, which has been withdrawn, taking the aggregate amount of TDS to 1,50,000. So this is just an illustrative example of how the thresholds would operate in the context of non-filers of return of income. Now, what are the issues which have arisen in the context of 194N? So I remember discussing the last time around when I had come to this forum that it is going to be very difficult for the banks per se to understand whether the particular taxpayer has complied with his return filing obligation or no. So there was a press release in September last year, and then this news became, it came in the public domain that the department has provided a utility. So now we are all acquainted with it, that the department has now provided a utility. I have just shared the link here, and the scheduled commercial banks or the banks in general are in a position to check the return filing status of the taxpayer basis the PAN of the assessee. So the moment the PAN is inserted, you know what is his return filing status for the past years, and accordingly the banks can decide the decide the threshold as well as the rates for which the TDS has to be deducted. So this is one thing which has been taken care of, though there are two other open issues which, which are not still clear as far as 194N is concerned. And it is a question of what is the position if a particular taxpayer, it is his first year of operation. So now naturally the data for the return filing status for the past 3 years is not going to be available per se because it is not applicable to the assessee given the fact that it is its first year of operation. So how would the section apply in such a case? Will you just go literally with the wordings of the proviso and apply the higher thresholds, or whether you would consider that since there is no specific provision in the section and then you kind of stick to the old stick to the usual 1% rate? So this is something which still lacks clarity, and to my mind, the banks, out of abundant caution, since there is nothing specific provided, it would go by the notion that the person has not furnished his returns for the past 3 years. in question, totally overlooking the fact that the SSC was not in existence per se, and I believe they would be applying the higher thresholds as such. So this is one particular open area as far as this section is concerned. Secondly, the section specifically states that the return or the due date under section 139(1) has expired. So now there are also questions which come up that whether if the assessee has filed a belated return or he has filed a revised return, so would you still go by the July due date, or whether you would kind of accommodate the fact that the assessee has later on filed the return of income. So now here in this case, the view which I would like to probably take, and what has been my understanding in this context, is that the mention of section 139(1) in the proviso is only with regards to the fact of ascertaining as to for which year the date has expired or for which year the return had to be filed. So in my mind, even if the assessee has filed a belated return or a revised return, it should be considered as if the compliance for the return filing has been made, and he should not be hit by the proviso. So the point that I'm trying to make is when the section is making a reference, whether return under section 139(1) has been filed or not, it is for the limited purpose of understanding whether for that particular previous year the due date has been expired or not. So it is for ascertaining which 3 years to consider. Right. So if there's a withdrawal which is made in the month of, let us say, January 22, speaking of 21-22, then the due date under 139(1) for 21-22 has also expired, which is the due date in July 21. So to my mind, even if a return has been filed under section 139(4) or 5, which is maybe a revised return or a belated return, it would still be acceptable, and the assessee should not be hit by a non-filer threshold. So this is all about 194(n), which I had to incrementally share as regards our discussion from the last time around. Going further, section 194(o), as we all can see. So I can see few questions. Friends, we would be considering all of them at the end of the session. So once we'll run through all the provisions and then have a look at all the questions together. So section 194(o) is basically in respect of sale of goods or provision of services by an e-commerce operator of an e-commerce participant. Now this sale is made through an electronic or digital platform, right? And an e-commerce operator is then under an obligation to make TDS at the rate of 1% of the gross amount of sale or service, or both. So last time around, we had taken several small illustrations of various e-commerce operators. So this is a very new and dynamic line of operations, I would say. So in this case, whatever is the gross sales or a gross amount payable for the sales or services which are provided by the e-commerce participant through the e-commerce operator, before making payment for the same, the e-commerce operator is under an obligation to make TDS at the rate of 1%. Now, there are instances wherein the purchaser of the goods, right, he is directly paying to the e-commerce participant. So maybe I order something from a particular restaurant via Swiggy or Zomato. I make the payment directly to the restaurant person, correct? In this case also, even though the consideration has been paid to the e-commerce participant, it will still be assumed that the e-commerce operator has paid it to the participant, and it would be thereby included in the gross amount of sales for the purpose of TDS. Then there are certain exclusions. So for small retailers or small e-commerce participants as such, wherein their aggregate amount of sale or service or both is not crossing the threshold of 5 lakhs in a particular year, and who have furnished the PAN and Aadhaar to the e-commerce operator, there would be no requirement as such to deduct TDS under this particular section. So that is a small exclusion. Then there are certain amounts to which the provisions of this section are not applicable, which is in the context of amounts which are received or receivable for hosting any advertisements or providing any services which are not in connection with sale or services related to the e-commerce participant. So maybe there are some push ads which are there on certain e-commerce operators, websites, etc. So if the participant is paying something, it's not going to be net off in any way. You have to keep the gross sales separate and TDS has to be deducted on such amount. Now, the only point which I would like to draw the participants' attention here is in the context of what is the definition of e-commerce operator and what is the definition of an e-commerce participant. So e-commerce operator here has been defined to mean any person who is operating or managing a digital or electronic facility or platform for electronic commerce. So you have a lot of examples here for e-commerce operator, which could be Amazon, Flipkart, Myntra, Zomato, Swiggy, etc. E-commerce participant specifically is included to cover only a person who is resident in India. So while an e-commerce operator may include a non-resident person or a payer, the participant here is only going to be a person who's resident in India and who's selling their goods or services via these e-commerce platforms. So this is one important distinction which we should keep in mind. And again, services here would include your FTS and professional services, which are covered, which are defined rather in section 194G. So here I am this time around coming around with a different illustration. So last time I had taken 5 small case studies for this particular section. Now I have tried to incorporate concepts of discounts which are offered by various e-commerce participants and operators in the form of a small illustration. So let us quickly run through this and understand how the dynamics of TDS in this context is going to work. So Amazon India is a resident e-commerce operator which is facilitating the sale of Indian vendors. The transactions which have been done during the previous year are as follows. So this is amount in lakhs. So at MRP, there is a gross amount of 2000 lakhs, which is the aggregate value of transactions which have been done during the year. There is a 10% discount which is offered by the e-commerce participant, right? So 10% of the MRP, which is a discount given by the vendor or the seller of the products per se, which comes to 200 lakhs. There is an additional 10% discount which is given by the e-commerce operator as well. So maybe there is a sale on Amazon or Flipkart, and they from their end are also extending an additional discount at the rate of 10% in my illustration. And then there's a 10% commission which is charged by the e-commerce operator, right, which is at the net amount. So that is 2000 lakhs minus this 200 lakhs, that 10% of that which is charged from the e-commerce participant. Now, as per the provisions of this section, the gross amount of sales, which have been the sales effected by the e-commerce participant through the e-commerce operator, are of 1800 lakhs. That is the amount which is the MRP reduced by the discount which is offered by the e-commerce participant. In determining this gross amount of sales, we are not going to consider the discount which is offered by the e-commerce operator as such in the context of this transaction. And we are also not going to consider the commission which is charged. So like you see, there's a to and fro here as far as the transaction is concerned, but we're just going to look at the amount of sales which have been done through the e-commerce operator by the e-commerce participant, and Amazon India, which is the e-commerce operator, will be deducting TDS at the rate of 1% on this 1800 lakhs of component before it makes payment to the e-commerce participant. So this is a little different illustrations from the case studies which I had covered earlier, which is factoring in discounts and all. But again, I would like to make a small kind of statement here that the manner in which the transaction or the agreements between the e-commerce operators and participants are structured and worded is something which we don't really know here, or there is no thumb rule with respect to that. So what all could form a part of the gross amount of sale would still to an extent depend as to what are the exact commercials of the transactions entered between the two parties. So going further in this particular section, so this is the update which I wanted to come to rather. That is the reason I included this section again in my discussion today. So the CBDT had the power, or it has been empowered to kind of come out with some guidelines to remove any difficulties which are there in the operation of this particular section. So adhering to that power, CBDT has come out with certain guidelines, and I have put down the highlights of those guidelines here in the slide. So the first one is section 194O is not applicable to transactions which are carried out through recognized stock exchanges. So this is a clarification which has come in by way of a guideline given by the CBDT. The next one is the payment gateway will not be required to deduct TDS on a transaction if tax has been deducted by the e-commerce operator. So this is to avoid the dual TDS which might happen in a particular scenario, because most of the e-commerce operators at the time of making payment or so will redirect you to a different page, which is the payment gateway in question, and then there arises a question that whether the payment gateway is also under an obligation to deduct TDS or no. So it has been clarified that when the tax deducted at source obligation is on the e-commerce operator per se, the payment gateway is not certainly required to deduct TDS in an online e-commerce transaction. The third one is in the context of insurance agents and aggregators. So the guideline reads that if the insurance agent or aggregator has no involvement in transactions between the insurance company and the buyer of insurance policy, he would not be under an obligation to deduct tax. Now, how I understand this is in the context that there are various websites today which allow you to compare different insurance products and directly buy insurance online without the involvement of any agent or aggregator per se. So in this case, the buyer is directly opting to buy a particular product of an insurance company online. So because there is no intermediary in the nature of an insurance agent or aggregator involved here, naturally he would not be under an obligation to deduct tax in this particular case. So this is how I interpreted this. So these are three pointers which have come in the form of CBDT guidelines in the context of section 194. This is a small comparison I have attempted to make as far as section 194O and equalization levy is concerned. So I'm sure we all are tapping the new areas of practice, and international tax is a very promising area as such. So it is always good for us to acquaint ourselves with the developments there. So equalization levy is certainly something which is very new and dynamic that has come into existence since the past 2-3 years. So here I have, just for the purpose of a comparison, I would say, just put down or tabulated what are the differences between provisions of section 194O and the equalization levy. So under the TDS provisions, the e-commerce operator is liable to deduct and deposit the amount of withholding tax with the central government. Whereas for the equalization levy, the e-commerce operator is liable to deposit the particular amount with the central government. As far as the residential status of the e-commerce operator is concerned, for the TDS provisions, he could be both a resident as well as a non-resident. Whereas in the context of equalization levy, only non-residents are covered. So this is a very important difference here, and a lot of non-resident e-commerce operators have made several representations to the government that there is an overlapping between 194O and the levy. However, for the general interest of participants, I'll say that this year the Finance Act 21 has done some clarification as far as the scope of, the scope of things that can be included into equalization levy has concerned, with an intention to reduce this unrest that is there. As far as residential status of the e-commerce participant is concerned, for TDS provisions, he has to be a resident. And for equalization levy purposes, he has to be a non-resident, and the sale of goods and services should not be effectively connected with the PE in India. The customer who is ultimately purchasing the product via the e-commerce operator for 194O, he, as well as equalization levy, it could be a resident or a non-resident in India. And the rate for TDS purposes is 1% of the gross amount, whereas in the context of equalization levy, it is 2% of the consideration received or receivable by an e-commerce operator from the supply of goods or services. So this is just a comparative analysis of 194O and the equalization levy. Moving further, as we all know, dividend distribution tax has been abolished or has been now taken off the statute. So it automatically reintroduces the withholding tax provisions in the context of dividend, which is paid by a company to its shareholders. So the rate of TDS in the context of dividend here is at the rate of 10% on payment of dividend to a resident, which is exceeding 5,000. And in case it is paid in cash, the threshold has been determined at 2,500. Now, wherein the recipient of dividend is a non-resident assessee, Section 194 would not be applicable, but then Section 195 warrants a TDS at the rate of 20% on the dividend which is made to non-residents. Now, at this juncture, I would just like to discuss a conceptual provision here. So let us discuss about 222E, which is in the nature of deemed dividend. And as we all know, it was very well within the scope of dividend distribution tax, right? So in the days of DDT, there have been several decisions as to the dividend has to be considered as taxable to whom. So as we all know, Section 222E has three limbs, right? So one is wherein an amount of loan or advance is made directly to a shareholder who is a registered as well as a beneficial shareholder and who's having substantial interest or the designated amount of voting power in the company. Secondly, when the amount was paid to another concern in which such shareholder was having substantial interest. Now, in this second limb of 222E, there was a lot of chaos surrounding the taxability as to in whose hands this dividend was to be considered as taxable. So there have been decisions in the case of Ankitech and also in the case of Burmick Color, which is I think now a Bombay High Court decision, that this amount would be taxable to the shareholder per se and not the concern, that is, let us to say a partnership firm or any other entity in which such shareholder has substantial interest. Now, when we look at this aspect from the viewpoint of deductibility of tax at source, again, when amount has been given by way of a loan, let us say, to a concern in which the shareholder has substantial interest, the company would be under an obligation to deduct TDS. So in whose hands would the taxability of such dividend be considered? So given the position which is presently settled, I would say we would still stick to the view that this amount would be taxable in the hands of the shareholder per se. And therefore, following that logic, the TDS also would have to be made considering that this dividend income is the income of the shareholder per se, even though the receipt of the amount is by the entity or the concern in which such shareholder has substantial interest. So this is what I just had to share as far as this particular provision was concerned. So there are a few questions. I would just again like to reiterate that we would be coming to all the questions towards the end of the presentation. We would quickly run through the provisions and discussion first. So you all can keep sending your questions in the chat box and we would take them after the session. Okay. Now this is the other amendments part for the TDS, from the TDS perspective, which I just mentioned, which is TDS in the context of pension and interest income of senior citizens. Now, as we all know, when the budget was announced, there was a particular relaxation given from the return filing requirement for certain specific senior citizens. Now, this section is complementary section to that particular relaxation which has been given. So as to say, if the senior citizens which are covered in the context of this provisions, if they are complying with the conditions which are given out by this section, and if their TDS has been adequately deducted, in that case there is no requirement for them to file their return of income. So let us understand what these provisions are basically talking about. So in the context of this particular section, the payer is a specified bank, correct? So what is a specified bank? It will be soon clarified, right? The payee is a resident senior citizen who is aged 75 years or more during the previous year. The rates are the rates in force, which implies that the applicable slab rates have to be considered in this context, right? The threshold as to about what amount TDS is warranted has not yet been prescribed by the section. Also, what is the time for deduction of withholding tax has also not been prescribed by the section. It has not still given any particular time, that whether at the time of payment of pension or payment of interest, whatever is earlier, that has not been specified. So right now, all information we have is the payer is specified bank, right? The payee is a senior citizen who is a resident and he who is about 75 years of age or more during the previous year. The rates are the rates in force. Threshold is not specified. Time for deduction is not specified. Now, what are the conditions for the deduction of tax at source? So first, the income of such senior citizen has to consist only of pension and interest. So he is not to have any other passive income other than pension which he is receiving from his former employer and the interest income which he is receiving as a result of investing his pension income. Correct? Now, the interest again should be received or receivable from any account which is maintained by the senior citizen in the specified bank. So the amount of interest which he is receiving has to be from that same bank. If there is any other interest which is received from any other bank other than the specified bank, or because of any other investments made, then he would not be in compliance with the conditions given out by this particular section. Again, his pension income should be received in the same bank. So that is the designated bank for purpose of receipt of all incomes or accrual of all incomes for the senior citizen. And after that, the senior citizen has to furnish a declaration to the bank containing such particulars in such form, verified in such manner as may be prescribed. So he has to give a declaration to the effect that he is compliant with these conditions, that he has no other income except the interest and the pension which he is receiving. So this is what the section basically talks of, right? So I would say right now it appears to be a very vague provision. The only linkage is that if these conditions have been complied with and the specified bank has deducted the necessary TDS from the income of the senior citizen, he would not be obligated to furnish his return of income. But if we look at the criteria as to what is the income covered here, plus these conditions, it is quite apparent that it would be a very narrow scope in terms of applicability of this section. Because a senior citizen having just pension and interest which is received in the same bank, so he should not technically be having any other income which is in the nature of investment income, be it dividend on shares or some amount of capital gains, maybe from sale of some mutual funds, etc. So no other income has been taken to be applicable. So this section looks to be in a very limited applicability to me right now. Plus, the bank here is required to compute the income of the senior citizen. So because the rates of TDS which have been prescribed are the rates in force, it would somehow operate like 192, which is TDS in case of salary. So you would be required to estimate his income for the year and then apply his slab rates and sort of deduct his TDS. That is how I am perceiving it to be. So Perhaps for this section to become operational, more details should be provided by way of some prescribed form or manner, because the threshold or the time for deduction, etc., has not been prescribed. So there's a wait and watch as far as the practical implementation of this particular section is concerned. So this was about, one part of the TDS related amendments which I had to cover, which were, I would say, the lesser havoc creating ones. So now we would move on to, I believe, what is the most sought after discussion in the evening, which is the comparison between section 194Q and section 206C1H. Right. So I would just take that. Give me a minute. So we all know the provisions of section 206C1H, which were introduced by Finance Act 2020, and they were to take effect from July, and then they were later on postponed, or I would say deferred till October. And from 1st October 2020, these provisions became effective. So a lot of discussions, a lot of time was invested in understanding and deliberating upon the provisions of TCS in the context of sale of goods. And as we were all trying to settle down with the implications of that particular section which came in the statute, this year the Finance Act came out with 194Q, which is in respect of TDS in the context of purchase of goods. So if we speak of TCS and TDS, there are like mirror image sections we have. Of course, TCS is applicable from the seller's perspective and TDS is applicable from the buyer's perspective. So I'm going to now deliberate upon all the so the discussion here, my flow for the particular topic is, first we would do a comparative analysis between both these sections, which is tabulated here. Then we'll go and look at what are the specific points or how section 194Q looks to be. And then we'll evaluate how the interplay between both these sections is, how their applicability has to be determined. So this is a quick recap of sale of goods TCS section, which is 206C1H, and a new understanding which we have to imbibe, which is TDS in the context of purchase of goods, which is 194Q. So what are the bases of distinction here? So first of all, the person who is liable for deduction or collection in the context of section 194Q, it is the buyer who is liable to deduct tax at source. In the context of sale of goods under 206C1H, it is the seller, as we all have now come to terms with, who is liable to collect tax at source. So there is a criteria for applicability of 194Q, which says that the total sales, turnover, or gross receipts from business in the immediately preceding previous year should exceed INR 10 crores for the buyer. The same criteria is there in the context of 206C1H, but then it speaks from the perspective of the seller, stating that the total sales, turnover, and gross receipts should exceed INR 10 crores for the seller in the immediately preceding previous year. For the particular transaction with regards to which the TDS or TCS has to be collected or deducted, the threshold for a single transaction is 50 lakhs for any previous year. So from one particular party, if the buyer has purchased goods, the aggregate value of which is exceeding 50 lakhs during the course of the year, then on the amount which exceeds 50 lakhs, the buyer is under an obligation to do TDS. Likewise, it was for seller when the aggregate value of sales made in the course of one transaction, if it were to exceed 50 lakhs, then there was a TCS warranted at 0.1%. So what is the amount on which finally the TDS or TCS is to be made? It is on the consideration which is in excess of 50 lakhs. So you have a sort of exemption, I would say, till 50 lakhs. And once the threshold crosses 50 lakhs, it is only then that you are required to do the TDS or the TCS. What is the time for collection or deduction of tax? Now, in the context of section 194Q, it is at the time of payment or credit, whichever is earlier. So like we all know, TDS sections usually have this logic with a few exceptions, that TDS is generally made at the time of either crediting the payee's account or payment, whatever happens earlier. In the context of TCS under 206C1H, the trigger for tax collection was at the time of receipt, right, which we have now all come to be settled. Now, what is the preference? So if in a particular situation, let us assume both these sections are coming to be applicable, what is the preference which you would accord? So naturally, because of section 194Q and the second proviso to section 206C1H, section 194Q would be the first preference. So ideally, the buyer would first be obligated to make TDS under section 194Q. And if he fails in sort of, admitting his obligation, then the seller would be required to collect TCS in respect of that transaction. So this is just a basic comparative analysis of both the sections per se. Now, this is something more, which is, elaborating the conditions which are there. So there are twofold conditions for applicability of either 194Q or 206C1H. First one is with regards to the turnover of the immediately preceding previous year, which has to be more than 10 CR. And second criteria is with respect to the transaction in question, wherein the aggregate value has to be 50 lakh rupees or more during the particular previous year. So there are 4 situations which I have tabulated here. So there is this buyer's details and seller's details. So let us have a look at this. This would solve most of our questions, is what I would like to believe. So let us say if the turnover of the buyer in the preceding financial year is more than 10 CR and the purchase of goods is 50 lakhs or more. So both the criteria have been fulfilled by the buyer in this case, and therefore he would be warranted to deduct TDS under 194Q. Now, because the buyer is fulfilling with this applicability criteria, 206C1H as such would not be applicable, and we would be required to evaluate its applicability only if the buyer fails to fulfill his obligation as far as TDS is concerned. So for the time being, when the buyer is fulfilling both the conditions, we would say that 206C1H per se would not be applicable and the buyer would be under an obligation to comply with the TDS provisions. Looking at the second situation, in this case, the turnover is more than 10 CR and the purchase is less than 50 lakhs. So here the buyer is complying with the criteria of criteria for turnover in the immediately preceding previous year, but the aggregate value of transaction as such is not crossing 50 lakhs in a previous year. So because the twofold criteria is not met, there is no obligation for TDS under section 194Q. And if we evaluate it from the perspective of 206C1H, since the sales are less than 50 lakhs, so you have to evaluate the transaction from both the perspectives. So if the buyer's purchase is less than 50 lakhs, naturally the seller's transaction is also for an amount which is less than 50 lakhs, and therefore TCS would also not be required in situation number 2. Going to situation number 3, the turnover is less than 10 CR and the purchase or the aggregate value of purchases made during the previous year are more than 50 lakhs. Now let us evaluate this transaction from the buyer's perspective. So the buyer is not complying with the twofold criteria and he is not obligated for TDS deduction because his turnover in the immediately preceding previous year is less than 10 CR. However, since the aggregate value of transaction for that year is more than 50 lakhs, we will now evaluate if TCS is required to be made by the seller. Now here there could be two possibilities. One, if the seller's turnover is more than 10 crores in the immediately preceding previous year. Now what happens in situation 3 is 194Q is out of its applicability because the buyer is not complying with the threshold criteria as regards the turnover. Therefore, we have to factor in the applicability of 206C1H because the aggregate value of transaction for purchase or sales, the way you look at it, is crossing the threshold criteria of 50 lakhs. Now, in this case, there could be two possibilities. One, the seller's turnover is more than 10 crores. So if the seller's turnover is more than 10 crores, he is complying with both the conditions of 206C1H. One, his turnover being more than 10 CR in the preceding previous year, and two, aggregate value of sales during the previous year being more than 50 lakhs. Right? So then 206C1H becomes applicable in this first part of situation 3. Now what happens if the turnover of the seller is also less than 10 CR? So the buyer was not under an obligation to deduct TDS because his turnover was less than 10 CR. So he's outside the applicability of 194Q. Also, the seller's turnover in this context is less than 10 CR. So he is also outside the applicability of 206C1H, and therefore there is no requirement for TCS. So this was about situation 3, which is a possible overlap. But then trust me, there's never going to be a situation wherein the TDS provision would also come into picture and the TCS provision would also come into picture. If the buyer and seller are both complying with the respective condition, then 194Q will always take precedence over section 206C1H. Only in these kind of situations where either or of the conditions are not fulfilled, then we have to evaluate the separate applicability of whether 194Q comes into picture or 206C1H comes into picture. Now coming to the fourth and the last situation which I have tabulated here is, if the turnover is less than 10 CR and the purchase is less than 50 lakhs. So here 194Q is simply not applicable because neither of the conditions are being fulfilled, and trust me, they are cumulative conditions, so both have to be fulfilled. Now looking at it from the perspective of the seller. Now seller's turnover here is not really relevant because your aggregate value of transaction is as such less than 50 lakhs. Right? So there is no question of 206C1H being applicable in this case. So this is how I have tried to cover the interplay between both the sections 194Q, which is the TDS provision, and 206C1H, which is the TCS provision. Right? There is more to this. Of course, there are a lot of conceptual issues also which would need to be looked at. But these two tables are giving us I would say, a holistic understanding of how both the sections are going to be applicable and what takes precedence over the other. Now, just, kind of recapping some issues of 206C1H, which are now more or less settled, I would say, with the amount of time that has gone by. But these were the points which had garnered a lot of attention last time around when the section was introduced. So firstly, whether the TCS provision is applicable in respect of all sale consideration, including advances, etc., which are received for sale, which are received on or after 1st October 2020. Now, not to put in more words in respect of this, but I would say that though there might be different views, but there was a circular which kind of came in and said that all amounts which are received on or after 1st October 2020 would be affected by 206C1H, even if they were considerations in respect of a sale which was priorly made, or even if it was advance received for a particular transaction. So if we adhere to the view which was advocated by the circular, then in respect of that, all the sale consideration comes within the ambit of 206C1H, be it for a prior sale or be it in the nature of advance, which is received on or after 1st of October 2020. The second point which had come up for discussion was how would you determine the threshold criteria of 50 lakhs for any previous year. So as to say, if there were any sales which were executed between the period April to September 2020, would they also be considered for the purpose of determining this criteria at 50 lakhs? And though everybody had almost consented that they should be included, the circular also favored this view, and therefore for determining the threshold, we will be considering the sales from April to September was the view which was adopted. Now, because the trigger for TCS was in the context of receipt of consideration, right? The words which are used in the provision are receipt of consideration. There was no adjustment per se required on account of sales return or discount, because the consideration which would be received from the buyer would be net of all these amounts, and the seller would have to factor in only the amount which was received as such. So that was one aspect. And the last and the most debated question was whether your GST should form a part of consideration for the purpose of TCS or no. Now, the circular which came out in the month of September said that you have to consider TCS in respect of consideration, including the GST component. I do agree and acknowledge that there are different views possible, but if we limit our understanding in the context of the circular which came out in this regard, then yes, GST had to form a part of your consideration for the purpose of TCS, and that is what had been advised to clients also from a conservative basis, though I wouldn't refute the alternate view as such. So these were the highlighting aspects of section 206C1H, which were hot topics of discussion last time, I would say 6 months back. Now let us look at the provisions of section 194Q before we look at what could be the probable issues arising out of the introduction of new provisions. So I can see a lot of questions. Everybody please be assured whatever questions have been put up by the participants, to the best of my ability, I would be answering them. But let us get done with the content first. Now, the provisions of section 194Q say that the buyer is responsible for paying any sum to a resident for purchase of any goods of the value or aggregate value exceeding 50 lakh rupees in any previous year. He is responsible to deduct tax at source at the time of payment or credit, whichever is earlier, and the rate of tax is given at 0.1% of the amount exceeding 50 lakhs. So the payer here is the buyer, right? The payee is the seller, and for this payee here, what has been specified is that he's got to be a resident. There is no criteria in terms of residential status which has been prescribed so far as the buyer is concerned. So there could be a possibility that a non-resident buyer might also be required to oblige to this particular section as such. So these are what the provisions in very, very brief I have tried to put it across. Now the same issues, which were there in the context of 206C1H would arise here, that what would be considered as goods. So though both the sections are predominantly, moving around the concept of TDS or TCS on goods, none of the sections or the act per se has come out with a definition as to what should be considered as goods. So it could be anything which is marketable or which is capable of being sold in the market. And then we would have to look at certain different statutes to draw some inference from, maybe the Sale of Goods Act or the GST Act or the Customs Act, etc., to understand what would come within the meaning of the term goods. Now, only in the context of shares and securities, the circular which I referred to, I think that is circular number 7, which has come out in the month of September 17, which came out on 29 September last year. So that has made a reference that such shares and securities on which securities transaction tax has been paid trade and which traded through a recognized stock exchange are outside the purview of goods. So if there is a dealer in shares who is dealing in listed shares and securities, then this is outside the purview of section 206C1H per se. Unlisted shares and securities would still be covered within the meaning of the term goods. Now, if an investor is holding some shares in securities, then those would certainly be outside the scope of both the sections because he is holding the same in the nature of an investment and it is not something which he ordinarily trades in, right? So this is one point which I had to share here. Moving ahead, what are the common points which could be, of concern over here? Now, I remember last time around also there was a lot of discussion whether software and other intangibles has to be covered within the meaning of the term goods. Now, I think there is a Tata TCS decision, if I'm not wrong, for this, which says that any kind of software, etc., has to be also considered as a part of goods. And I believe there are several precedents in the GST law as well, which have considered that software should be treated as goods. So, to my mind, yes, software and other intangibles that are there, they should also comprise as a part of goods for both, for 206C1H also and now for 194Q also, because neither of the sections have taken the trouble to define what goods is. However, as I was reading further in this case, there are two kinds of software per se. One is something which is called as a canned software or something which is readily available for purchase off the shelf. So there is no element of customization as such as far as these kind of softwares are concerned. And then there is a second aspect which is called as a customized software in which the buyer has the option to give out some specifications and accordingly purchase the particular software or license on those lines. Now, while canned software is something which is readily available and there are no specifications included for it, I could say it could come in the term goods very easily. But if there is something which is customized as per the requirements of the buyer, there could be a possibility of maybe it being treated as a professional service also, wherein you are maybe appointing some agency to develop a customized software which is unique to your circumstances. So there could be a slight overlap, I would say. But as far as purchase of software, which is uniformly available to everybody is concerned, it would come within the meaning of the term goods. Next is the TCS provisions in terms of 206C1H have no carve out in respect of B2B transactions. So B2B transactions are basically business to business transactions wherein a person is purchasing goods and then using those goods for his own business or a manufacturing activity, adding some value to it and then selling it further. So those transactions have not been specifically carved out of 206C1H. At this point, I would like to just mention that 206C1A, which is the original TCS section, which is in the case of all that scrap and all those specific tabulated goods which are there, those provisions have a specific carve out when the goods are sold, purchased by a buyer for his own business purpose and not end use. So one would have expected a similar carve out for 206C1H, which is not there. Similarly, for 194Q also, there is no particular demarcation as to whether the purchase of goods by the buyer is as an end use consumer or it is merely as an intermediary for further processing or a part of his own business activity. So that is absent in both the provisions. Third point here is goods which are sold to SEZ or EOU units, whether liable for TCS and now also for TDS. So my view here would be yes, again, because even though the SEZ and the EOU units are accorded status of an export status as such, but then the goods are not per se exported outside India, and therefore they were liable to TCS under 206C 1H, and they would be liable for TDS under 194Q as well. Now, the next point which I want to discuss here, rather the next 2 points, that how exactly do we ascertain turnover? So if you see both these sections, that is 206C1H and also 194Q, when they are determining the applicability threshold, they say that the turnover, receipts or sales of the buyer or the seller in the immediately preceding previous year has to cross 10 CR, right? Now, what do we understand by turnover per se? Of course, there's no specific definition for gross receipts and sales also, but let me right now restrict myself to turnover, and then it's the same concept that runs through gross receipts and sales also. Now, if we look at the definitions which are there in Section 2 of the Income Tax Act, they have not defined what turnover is. Neither have these two sections which are there, that is 206C1H or 194Q, defined what turnover is. A very predominant other section which uses the term turnover is, of course, 44AB, which is for the determination, or rather I would say applicability of tax audit criteria. And of course, we have section 145A, which tells us what is got to be turnover. But then if we look at the wordings of that particular section, it restricts its it restricts its meaning or its understanding of the term turnover only in the context of determining income under the head PGBP. So, if we could just read how 145A is worded, to my mind, it is restricting itself in such events where it pertains to computation of income under Chapter 4D, that is PGBP, right? So how would we borrow or how would we apply the meaning of the term turnover when we are evaluating the applicability of 206C1H or 194Q? Now, whether we can take the meaning given out by 145A, which is basically talking about the method of accounting. So if it's an inclusive method in the context of indirect taxes, you consider your turnover inclusive of the GST and other indirect taxes. If you are following an exclusive method, you sort of exclude it from your calculation. There is also an ICAI guidance note, as I remember, for this particular aspect. However, I would here like to take support or kind of rely on some decisions which are, I would say, in the context of indirect taxes. So there is a particular George Oakes decision. So these are quite old decisions as such, nothing which is of the recent times. But to my understanding, all of them are hinting at the preference that any amount which you receive from the purchaser or the buyer, which is drawn towards your sale transaction as such, that is what is going to be your turnover or your consideration per se. So if we just have what I would say a brief understanding of those decisions, then to my mind, your turnover has to include your indirect taxes component as such. Though there can be different views here, nothing is a thumb rule when we come to this discussion. But yes, the preferred view is of course linked to the method of accounting which is being followed and the precedents that we have in this regard point or indicate to a possibility that your turnover should be considered inclusive of your GST and other indirect tax levies. So this is one aspect here. So this is in the context of determining the 10 CR threshold which is there. So similarly, the words gross receipts, sales, turnover from business have been used interchangeably, or they have for the sake of caution being taken together. Also, what I would like to highlight here is in both these sections, they have stated it, or if you look at the bare provision, they have said that gross receipts, sales or turnover from business, right? So to my mind, in ascertaining this, you have to exclude any other non-business receipts of the assessee and purely focus on the turnover or the gross receipts which are resultant out of the business which is being conducted by the assessee. So I'll come to this back when we take one of the issues which have been discussed in the slides hereafter. So this is my understanding of this. Of course, when we proceed to the Q&A session, I would like to know what are the participants' views with regards to this. So let's move ahead with the next slide. Okay, yeah. So what are the other implications of 194Q? There are certain cases wherein other TDS sections are applicable. The provisions of 194Q would not be applicable. Also, wherein the transactions are covered by TCS other than TCS on goods. So, except 206C1H, wherein it is maybe TCS in the context of motor car or all those other scrap, liquor, etc., those transactions would not come under the purview of TDS. In case the seller has not furnished his PAN or likewise Aadhaar, then the TDS would be done at a higher rate of 5%. And as of now, this section comes into effect from 1st July 2021. As far as the interplay between 206C1H and 194Q is concerned, we already dealt with it in the earlier slides. So I hope that has been sufficiently deliberated upon. Now, what are the issues or what are the consequences, I would say, for 194Q? So just as was in the case of 206C1H, one would get a question as to how do you determine the threshold for 50 lakhs. So whether all the purchases which are done from the period from 1st of April 21 to 30th June 21, whether they should be included or not. So even though the circular which came out is specifically in the context of TCS, I would like to highlight here that when the section or when the bare provision speaks of a threshold for any previous year, so the provision itself is hinting towards the fact that this criteria of 50 lakhs has to be evaluated for the entire previous year in question, even though the provision has come to be effective or operative from a later date. So in this case, even though the section is to take effect from 1st of July, for determining the threshold criteria of 50 lakhs, we are to consider all the purchases which have been done between the period 1st April to 30th June as well. Second aspect here is whether non-resident buyer is liable to deduct TDS on purchase from resident seller. Now, when we discussed the bare provisions 2-3 slides back, I said that as far as the seller is concerned, there is a criteria as to the residential status being resident, but nothing has been specified when we speak of the buyer. So there could be a possibility that a non-resident buyer is also under an obligation to deduct TDS in case of purchases from a resident seller. However, one can assume that the government excludes, because the government has the power to exclude certain criteria of persons, it might end up excluding non-residents from the obligation to deduct TDS. So we need to wait and watch how this develops. What is the position in respect of import of goods or export of goods? Now, when we talk of import of goods, it would naturally be outside the scope because the seller per se, only residents are covered. And when we look at export of goods, I already discussed in the earlier points that there could be a possibility that a non-resident buyer would be liable to deduct TDS, but we need to wait and watch as to how this provision materializes once any guideline or circular is issued in this context. Now, friends, the most important point I would like to highlight here is when we were speaking of TCS and its related implications, from an advisory perspective or from the computation perspective, there was not much implication except the usual interest penalty, etc., which was there. But because 194Q is situated in Chapter 17B of the Income Tax Act, and we have 40A 1A, which says that in respect of any transaction for which TDS was to be deducted under Chapter 17B, and the payer has failed to do that in respect of transaction with the resident, there has to be a 30% disallowance. So this is going to be a very huge consequence if the buyer has failed to fulfill fulfill his obligation of deducting tax at source, right? So this is something which we need to be aware of, and we should make our clients aware of wherever this particular section is applicable, because merely for a 0.1% of the entire transaction in excess of 50 lakhs, of course, you would be ending up disallowing 30% of the purchase expenditure, which is likely to shoot up the income tax liability significantly. So this is one of the consequences which would naturally come into picture if the buyer fails to deduct tax at source under section 194Q. Going further, another question which is likely to come up in this context is whether TDS is to be deducted inclusive of GST. Now, here also I would like to make a significant departure from how we have understood TCS. So when we spoke of TCS, we discussed that on account of the circular plus the conservative view which we would like to adopt, that TCS has to be done on the consideration amount inclusive of GST. But when we speak of TDS, we have few precedents also, and if in the invoice the amount of GST has been separately indicated, then to my mind TDS ought to be made only in respect of the purchase cost, and it should not be inclusive of the GST component, right? This is one aspect. Second question which I would like to discuss again takes us back to what could be the possible meaning of the term goods in respect of 194Q, and whether capital goods would be included in this. Now, when we, to my mind, yes, because there has been no distinction which is made either by the section or any explanation to the section that it has to be goods which are usually representing the stock in trade of the assessee or something to that effect. So even if there has been a purchase of capital goods which is crossing the threshold criteria and other conditions are being fulfilled, the buyer would be under an obligation to deduct tax at source insofar as the provision is concerned. Here, I would just like to discuss one point which academically had interested me when the TCS provisions came into picture. So there was a possibility to evaluate that whether TCS would also be applicable in respect of capital goods. So for everybody's attention, though the section states, though the slide states 194Q, I'm just discussing a corollary to 206C1H. So while I am of the view that TDS has to be deducted in respect of purchase of capital goods as well, what was the position or what is the position as far as 206C1H is concerned? So there, friends, I am of the view that capital goods are outside the purview of 206C1H, and this has something to do with the way in which the chapter which contains section 206C1H is worded. So if you look at the cumulative effect of the way those provisions are, it gives me an understanding that capital goods are outside the purview of 206C1H, though alternate view could exist. This is what I think that I am sharing. But so far as 194Q is concerned, yes, you would be required to do TDS even if you end up buying some machinery or some kind of other plant equipment, which is not something which represents your stock and trade in the normal course of your business activities. Next issue which could come up is whether purchases which are made from a single seller from different locations or units have to be aggregated. So maybe there is a seller who is having, who has maybe a factory in state of Maharashtra, other one in Gujarat, etc. And there's a buyer who is purchasing goods from various locations belonging to that particular seller. So whether all the purchases have to be aggregated to determine the threshold criteria of 50 lakhs. So my answer here would be yes, because it would operate against a single PAN to my mind, and the assessee, at the end of the day, the seller is one single entity, though the multiplicity of locations is to ease out his business operations. So even though the purchases are made from different locations of a seller, the aggregate value of all those purchases has to be I mean, the value of all those purchases has to be aggregated to determine the threshold of 50 lakhs for a year. Next is a very interesting question which I had come across in one of the sessions which I took on the same topic at some other place. So this question is, what would be the position of 194Q in the context of payments which are in relation to transaction in electricity? Now, if you look at certain large industrial undertakings or certain corporate assessees, their annual electricity outlays could exceed 50 lakhs. And if they are crossing the 10 crore criteria as well, it would amount to purchase of electricity from either the MSEB or whoever is engaged in the distribution or sale of electricity. Whether then 194Q would be applicable or no. So this is a very perplexing question, I would say. So because there have been decisions which have held that goods include electricity. So because electricity is something which is manufactured, which is, though intangible, it is not immovable as such. So we have a lot of precedents which are saying that goods will include electricity as such. So in the context of 194Q, if I were to answer this question, the way the provisions are today, yes, one would be required to deduct TDS in respect of the purchase of electricity, which crosses the threshold criteria. So it would be very weird because I doubt if, the MSEB or anybody else would accept a payment which is lower than the amount of bill for one. And secondly, it would be very absurd, I would say, to deduct tax at source in respect of payments which are being made to these agencies which are engaged in the sale or distribution of electricity. So, but yes, unless there are some specific exclusions which the CBDT comes out with in this regard, the way the provisions presently are, electricity forms, I mean, goods include electricity and therefore it could be affected by the provisions of section 194Q. So wherein there is an assessee who is paying electricity bills, which are, let us say, an aggregate of 50 lakhs in a year, then he could be under an obligation to deduct TDS. So we would have to wait if there are any specific exclusions which come out in this regard. At this juncture, I would also like to remind you that in the same scenario, so far as TCS was concerned, right? Because we could have the same question wherein the seller is, just like the buyer is paying a bill of more than 50 lakhs, it would amount to seller selling electricity to a tune of more than 50 lakhs. So that same circular which I made reference to, which came out in September last year, that has excluded electricity for the purpose of that particular section. But then there is no similar exclusion and we cannot take the support of that circular for 194Q because both are distinct provisions. So that is about the part on electricity. Nextly, another question which might come to mind is purchase of jewelry. Right. So here the purchase of jewelry could be for personal purposes or of course any other, I mean not necessarily for business of the assessee. And let us say if the buyer is complying with the conditions of that 10 crore criteria in the immediately preceding previous year, wherein the turnover restricts to his business. But then he might enter into a transaction for purchase of jewelry, which may or may not relate to his business. So if it relates to his business, fine, it is goods for him and then he's squarely covered by 194Q. But what could be the position if jewelry is not something which he ordinarily deals in and yet he has entered into a transaction which is crossing the threshold criteria of 50 lakhs? Whether can jewelry still be considered as goods or no? So to my mind, I really don't have a conclusive answer on this, but going by the fact that we should always be conservative when it comes to withholding tax provisions, and in the absence of any specific exclusion in this regard, I would probably take a position that maybe it is imperative to deduct TDS even in this transaction, unless there are some specific exclusions spelled out in this regard. These were some issues with regards to 194Q. So I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions, but before we go to that, I would quickly like to acquaint you all with another of a very important and I would say a provision which is going to have far reaching effects. So this would take about 5 to 7 minutes and then I would be looking at the questions, right? So this is something which we all need to be aware of and which we need to educate our clients also. So this is a new section 206 AB which has been introduced by Finance Act 21. At this point, I would like to clarify that there's a twin provision 206CCA which is also introduced in the context of TCS. But for the sake of simplicity, I have just covered the TDS provision in my presentation. The TCS provision is exactly similar with the difference being between TDS and TCS as such. So let us see what this provision has in store. So again, like we had the proviso in the context of section 194N, which was dealing with non-filers. Here we have a new section which prescribes higher rate of TDS in case of non-filers of return of income. So first they came out with 206AA, which prescribed that in case you are not providing your PAN or Aadhaar, you would be subjected to a higher rate of TDS. Then they came out with 206AB when they realized that there are a lot of people who are having PAN but they are not furnishing their return of income. So as to say that these non-filers would be subjected to a higher rate of TDS or TCS. So who fulfill the criteria to be called as a non-filer in the context of this section. So it refers to an assessee who has not furnished his return of income in the 2 immediately preceding previous years prior to the previous year in which the tax is required to be deducted. So the tax is required to be deducted in PY 21-22. So immediately 2 preceding previous years would be 2021 and 1920, for which the assessee has not furnished his return of income and the time limit under 139(1) has expired. Along with that, another condition is the aggregate of TDS or TCS is 50,000 rupees or more in each of these previous years. So this is a twofold condition and the condition is cumulative. One limb of the condition says that the assessee's got to furnish his return of income in the 2 immediately preceding previous years prior to the previous year in which the tax is required to be deducted. And the second condition is in each of these 2 years, the amount of TDS or TCS which was to be made is in excess of 50,000 rupees. दोनों में से कुछ भी fulfill नहीं हुआ, then you are not to be considered as a non-filer. This is something which we should keep in mind. I have put in a table sort of, elaborating this, but I'm just saying it for the sake of simplicity. This section is to come into effect as of now from 1st of July 2021. So what are the higher rates of TDS which have been prescribed under this section? So it says the rate of TDS is going to be twice the rate which is specified in the relevant provision. So if you are looking at, let us say 194J in the context of professional fees, it could be 10%. So twice the rate would be 20%. Or twice the rates in force. So this is for all those particular sections of TDS where the rate is the rate in force, which would mean the rates which have been specified in the Act, and rate of 5%. Higher of these 3 would be the rate of TDS in the case of non-filers, be it any particular TDS section. The rate would then be governed by 206AB, right? If the PAN is not furnished, then the rate of TDS would be the rate given by 206AB, which is this section, or 206AA, which is the section which is in case of non-furnishing of PAN. There are few exclusions from the applicability of this dangerous provision, I would say. So this would not apply in respect of TDS in the context of salary, income or payment of accumulated provident fund balance. It would not be applicable wherein casual income or windfall gains in the context of lottery, crossword, puzzle, horse races, or so as to say 194BE is concerned. Income from investment in securitization trusts and cash withdrawals wherein TDS is required under section 194N are the list of exclusions for the purpose of 206AB, right? Now, this is a comparison between 206AA and 206AB, and I would like to share a very important conceptual point here. Now, we all know that there are certain provisions in the Act which are called as non-obstante provisions, or which begin with a clause saying that notwithstanding anything contained in any of the provisions of the Act. Now, for those of you who have interest in reading the BEAR provisions, you will note that both 206AB and AA are non-obstante provisions. And usually when we interpret law, if there are two non-obstante provisions, then they both cannot be made applicable simultaneously. But then what has happened is when they brought in section 206AB, they specifically stated that if the provisions of 206AA are applicable, then tax would be deducted at higher of the rates as per both the sections. And because they put this enabling feature in 206AA, we now have to bear the brunt of both non-obstante provisions. So these are the rates which are given by 206AA. So that is for non-furnishing of PAN. So it says the rate which is specified in the relevant provision, or the rate or rates in force, or 20% higher of the above, which is A. And 206AB, which I just discussed in the earlier slide. So those three rates come to be at higher of the above, being B. Now the applicable rate in this case will be higher of A and B, and therefore both section 206AA and AB are applicable, and TDS will happen at the higher of the rates given by both the sections. Now here is a table which I have elaborated for the cumulative conditions that we have. So whether, let us say there is TCS or TDS which is applicable for 21-22, right? PY 21-22 I'm referring to, and this table refers to AY 2021 and 21-22, whether return of income is filed for both the years. So again, whether TDS and TCS in respect of each of the year is more than 50,000 rupees. And then we have the checkpoint as to whether that particular individual will be treated as a specified person, being a non-filer. So I would not really run through this entire tabulated version, but if you can just see, it is to highlight and to state that the conditions are cumulative, and even if for one particular year, let us say he has filed his return of income, or for one particular year the amount of TDS or TCS is less than 50,000 rupees, then he would not be categorized as a non-filer, and then he would be outside the scope of section 206 AB. So I am not really reading out this presentation will be shared with you, so you can have a look at it before determining whether a person is a non-filer in the context of 206 AB or not. What are the issues which could probably arise in the context of 206 AB? So again, the same compliance burden with regards to checking as far as the status of return filing of the payee would be now on the payer. So this is something similar to 194N, and they did provide a portal to the banks to check the return filing status. So we can wait and watch if something similar comes to be in the new e-filing portal, which is to be released from 7th of June, which would enable payers to ensure compliance with the higher TDS as far as 206 AB is concerned. But overall, it would certainly lead to an increase in the compliance burden, and this would have to be something which is to be checked real time, or so as to say every time a particular payment is made to the payee and the due date for furnishing return has lapsed, you need to go and check if the payee had furnished his return of income or no for the particular year in question. Now again here, as the proviso in section 194N makes reference to 139(1), we can see here that a reference is made for the time limit for under 139(1) has expired or not. So this would lead us to a question as whether if an assessee has filed a belated return or a revised return later on, whether he would be held to be non-compliant with his return filing. So again, I would like to take the same view which I deliberated upon when we discussed 194N earlier, that in the reference to 139.1 is only with a view to ascertain as to which previous year the time limit has lapsed. Later on, even if the assessee has furnished his return of income under, let's say, a belated or a revised return, it would still be held as compliance with the provisions. Now, whether the payer would be comfortable taking this stand or not is something which time will tell, because ultimately he would be treated as assessee in default. But to my mind, this seems to be the intention, and even if 139.1 139.4 or 5 the return has been filed, it would still be treated as compliance with the ROI status. So this was about what I had to cover as far as amendments are concerned. I think I have managed to finish discussing the provisions in good time to look at what the questions have come up. So if there is any particular thing which you all want me to deliberate upon once more, by the time I'll just have a look at the questions which have come up in the chat box.
Thanks, Prachi. Excellent presentation. You have covered in simple, lucid language a TDS, TCS amendment, recent amendments. Sneha will prepare the question answer and share on the screen. Meantime, I will first of all will recognize the presence of Preeti Savla. Thank you, Preeti madam, for joining us. Thank you, Preeti. Before Sneha compile all the questions, I request Rishi Agarwal to propose a well-deserved vote of thanks. Rishi, are you there?
Hello.
Yeah.
TDS and TCS, though being an old concept, the amendments have forced us again to unlearn and relearn the concept. And the informative session of CA Prachi Parekh and the detailed information shared by her will help us to understand the amendments more easily. On behalf of all the members present, I would like to thank her for her excellent presentation. Thank you, Prachi.
Thank you.
Thanks, Prachi.
Thank you for recognizing my presence, and it was Prachi, I would say, excellent presentation, and it was covered very well. And I hope all the participants and members of Mulund Study Circle are safe and healthy, and I wish that all are safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Vriti. Thank you, Vriti.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, I can see the screen.
Yeah.
So I'll go through the questions in the order they have appeared on the screen. Is checking filing status using the utility automated? If no, then how does the bank check for the threshold when an ATM withdrawal is made? So I think filing status is something which the bank has to my mind, manually check with the PAN numbers. To be honest, I have not myself checked the PAN number in the utility which has been provided. And if a withdrawal is made from an ATM, it would reflect in the account statement of the holder. And when the when the threshold has to be determined, I believe the banks would be required to check as to what rates of TDS would be applicable considering the aggregate amount of withdrawals and the return filing status. Under section 194N, if there is a commission agent or a trader operating under APMC makes payments to farmers in excess of 1 crore, TDS will not be made because, there is a list of exclusions which have come out by way of a circular which came out last year only. So I have not covered them in my presentation this year, but the APMC registered traders have been excluded by I mean, by way of that circular, there are two conditions that there is a reconciliation which is made, the withdrawals and the amount which is paid to the farmers for agricultural produce, and a separate account has to be maintained for this purpose. So I believe on fulfillment of these conditions, there would be no 194N applicable in this case. How do we consider sales inclusive of GST or should be excluded? I think I have answered this question. To my mind, turnover should be considered inclusive of GST. So far as your question to my mind refers to determining the 10 CR criteria. In e-commerce operator, if e-commerce operator doesn't deduct TDS on a transaction, then whether any liability falls on the payment gateway provider to deduct TDS under 194O. Now, this would largely depend on the dynamics of the transaction. It would not be an automatic liability on the payment gateway, to my mind, right? Because the primary obligation is on the e-commerce operator. Question on the slide titled 194QNH, where the vendor is also the buyer of the assessee, can the turnover be netted off? And should the sale and purchase be tracked separately? Okay, so what I'm trying to figure out from this question is there is a debtor-creditor kind of mutual relationship or a two-way thing which exists, and whether it should be considered net. So I think that shouldn't be netted off. It should be considered separately. That is my view. 194Q is only for purchase of goods or aggregate of goods and services. So the way the section is worded, it is only in the context of purchase of goods. So there could be certain composite contracts which would involve services as well, maybe where 194C, etc. could be applicable. But to my mind, 194Q is only in the context of goods. Whether while considering the turnover for the purchase of section 206E1H of 50 lakhs, whether turnover relating to the service should also be included to check the applicability. So rather than turnover, I would say a right word here is the aggregate value of transaction. And since it only speaks of goods, to my mind, the component of consideration relating to services should be excluded to check applicability of this section. Sneha, can you scroll down so I can read the 8th question? Yeah, thanks. So for section 206C1H, sales is say 60 lakhs from October to March 21, and the amount received before March 21 is 30 lakhs and received in financial year 21-22 is 30 lakhs. And no sales in 21-22, please enlighten about. Okay, so what I'm trying to understand from this question is whether this 50 lakhs is for a particular transaction or whether the limit is every year. So the limit is every year. So if this 60 lakhs which you have received is split into 2 financial years, wherein in neither of the years it's crossing that threshold. So I think there would be no TCS in this case. 194Q will be applicable from 1st July 21. So in the meantime, in Q1, if the receipt is more than 50 lakhs, then TCS will be applicable. But with regime change, yes, this could be a possibility wherein both the buyer and sellers are complying with the respective conditions in both the sections. So from 1st July, TDS will be applicable. So fresh 50 lakh threshold will not be there because for 194Q, like I said, the threshold of 50 lakhs has to include the purchases made from April to June also. So in this case, for this question 9, suppose July onwards, the buyer makes another purchase of say 25 lakhs and his threshold of 50 is already kind of exhausted. So he would be required to make TDS on that 25 lakh component. Ocean freight, will it be considered as goods? I'm not sure I understand the question, but if you're asking whether freight will form a part of consideration to determine the 50 lakh threshold, then no, I think freight and all such kind of expenses should ideally be excluded from the consideration aspect. if there is scrap sales by a company having business turnover of 10 CR or more and is required to collect TCS from the buyer of scrap. So scrap sale is covered to my mind in another provision of 206C and not 1H. So in that case, the TCS provision will apply and 194Q will not apply. So the seller will be under an obligation to do TCS here if the other conditions are fulfilled. No TDS under 194J on payments for software purchase, which is CBDT notification number so and so, dated so and so. So whether TDS or TCS is applicable on purchase of goods. So this is what, if you realized, I mentioned a part in software which was related to canned software and customized software. So what forms a part and parcel of 194J is something which is a customized version. But if I'm purchasing software which has not incorporated any specifications which I might have suggested, then in that case it could be treated as goods. So this is a gray area, I acknowledge, but to my mind, based on the plain reading of the provision, it would be treated as goods. Purchase from SEZ unit CS 194Q would be applicable because presently there is no specific exclusion. Suppose purchases are of 55 lakhs and TDS is not deducted by purchaser, then disallowance will be 30% of 50 lakhs or 55 lakhs. So here, unfortunately, we would have to look at 40A 1A, and there it says that if there is no TDS which is being done, then it would be 30% of the expenditure. So to my mind, it would be 55 lakhs because even in other cases wherein the threshold is exhausted and once your liability to deduct TDS comes into picture, it would be 30% of the entire expenditure. As you said, on purchases TDS deducted excluding GST, then whether seller needs to deduct TCS on GST component. See, as far as TDS is concerned, yes, there is a view that GST, if it is indicated separately, it can be excluded. But as far as TCS is concerned, the circular is quite clear and there have been views taken by professionals that TCS has to be done on the GST component also. And then what is it? Since if 194Q is not applicable, then no, I'm not sure I understand this question, but anyways. If in the previous year the buyer has purchased more than 50 lakhs, whether it would be required to deduct TDS under 194Q for each transaction in the current year. Yes, so once the threshold of 50 lakhs has been exhausted from the same seller, whatever you are acquiring in the particular year would be liable for TDS under 194Q. Petrol pump dealer TDS is to be deducted on purchases amount including VAT amount, as VAT is forming a part of purchase and set-off is allowed. So I wouldn't be capable enough to answer question number 17. Okay, whether TDS under 194Q is applicable for purchase of paintings. So tough one. So paintings, I don't know if they can be called as goods as such. So if, yes, why not? Unless there is a particular exclusion, it could be applicable to paintings as well. Whether agricultural goods are covered under 194Q or 206C1H, again, the term goods has not been defined. So to my mind, anything which is movable, tangible, marketable, at times even intangible would be covered under the term goods unless we have something specific excluding certain transactions from that. How would deductor determine a particular payee is a non-filer? What is the implication on the deductor if he has inadvertently deducted TDS? So we are hoping that a portal similar on the lines of 194N would come into picture for 206AB also. And if he has inadvertently deducted TDS lower of what he would supposed to have do, then to my mind, he would be considered as an assessee in default to the extent of short deduction. Okay, elaborate more on the applicability of TDS on electricity. So what I want to state here is 206C1H, we had the circular which specifically excluded electricity from the ambit of TCS. But there is nothing specific like that which has come till date in the context of 194Q. So if at all there is electricity bills which you are paying which are likely to cross 50 lakhs during a particular year, and your turnover as a buyer for the purpose of 194Q is already crossing 10 CR in the immediately preceding previous year, then there might be a possibility that you would have to deduct TDS on your purchase of electricity in excess of 50 lakhs in the year. But yes, there can be clarifications in this regard. 194Q is for purchase of goods only. It is not for aggregate of goods and services. I think I took this question earlier. Turnover criteria of threshold limit for 206C1H for TCS has to be seen applicable. Yes, every preceding accounting year. So given a particular year, if you are not kind of exceeded the 10 CR limit, then for that particular year, you would be outside the purview of 206C1H. Okay. Any more questions?
Prachi, one regarding non-filer.
Yes.
If the new entity, say partnership or private limited, just incorporated,
yes,
then
yes.
2 years criteria.
Yeah, so similarly, like we have a lacuna as far as 194N is concerned, wherein they have not given any specific direction what happens to new assessees. That same lacuna is there for 206AB also. So if it is a new entity which has come into existence and you're not, obviously you weren't in existence for the preceding 2 previous years, then what would be your position so far as the compliance with return filing criteria is concerned? That's not stated in the provision per se. So either we wait for a clarification, or at least then, you know, as being the case of abundant caution, we apply the higher rate of TDS, you know, because ultimately the payee will be able to claim credit of it in his after he files his return of income, but the payer would be in a disadvantaged scenario here if he ends up deducting short TDS. So unless there is a clarification in this regard, I think we should go by the thresholds for non-filers, though it sounds unjust.
Sneha, is there any more questions?
Yes, there is. If turnover of 10 CR or more is mainly of services only, whether TCS shall be applicable?
Okay, is it there in the chat box?
Yes.
I can see it, yeah. If the turnover of 10 crores is mainly of services, no, because it's only with regards to, I mean, 206C1H is speaking of goods, and turnover of 10 crores is mainly of services. Now, this is where, you know, that applicability of what exactly constitutes turnover and the difficulty in absence of definition would come into picture. So if we can say that it is the business turnover of the assessee, even though it is mainly derived out of services and partly or in a limited way out of goods, I think 206C1H could be applicable here, because for turnover determination criteria, there is no distinction to my mind.
Another question, should I read?
I'll check it in the chat box.
Okay.
So in the circular where the payment gateway is excluded, it is mentioned that payment gateway provider can take a declaration from e-commerce operator. Is it compulsory to take such a declaration? So I think it's a matter of procedure, and if the e-commerce operator is the one who's primarily responsible to deduct TDS, it would be a good practice to get such kind of declaration. Though I'm not sure how widely it is complied with or it is in existence. I mean, how many people actually take such declaration is something which I am not aware of, but yes, it would be better to do that. 50,000 limit is per deductee in section 206AB, or it is of deductor. So it is per payee. So as a payer, I have to check for every payee if the amount of TDS or TCS was in excess of 50,000 for that particular year. whether TDS has to be deducted on MSERTC as well. If yes, that presently seems to be the situation unless there is a clarification in that regard. Can TCS be collected and paid on sales basis for convenience? So a lot of people are actually doing that, though the section specifically states that the trigger is on receipt of consideration. So there is nothing to prevent you from doing that, but a better practice would be to do it on receipt, and more so now because the buyer would anyways, if he is fulfilling the criteria, he would be looking at a TDS perspective under 194Q, and it would be a I mean, any which ways, if you do it under receipt basis, reconciliation is something which is going to be a very demanding exercise. If whether how buyer will be able to take credit if he has not made payment during the current year. I'm not sure if I understand this question. Ocean freight, again, it's come up, somebody would have to, if it is the freight expenditure, then it would not be included in consideration. Okay, thank you. Many sellers have charged TCS on invoice in 2021 and discharged them in the month of invoice for convenience. Yes, that is what was the question that was there based on sales. Should they collect 0.025% in the current year and discharge it? So if that has been done earlier in the sales basis, then I think they should stick to it unless they comply with it, and then maybe collecting TCS on receipt basis is a better option. Yes, limit of 50 lakhs is per year. Okay, if TCS is being done on sales basis, whether buyer will be able to take credit if payment is not done. So buyer has not paid the consideration, but his TCS has already been credited. So this is, I think, we can take a chance and take credit and then see what happens. Okay. So I think, Sneha, I can see only these many.
Yeah, it's done.
Right.
Thanks, Prachi, for covering all the questions. Thanks a lot. Friends, one announcement. Next Saturday also we are having one study circle on recent amendments applicable to trust and registration by CA Paras Savla. We'll send the circular in a day or two. Thank you, Prachi, and we'll conclude the meeting. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you everyone for your participation. Thank you.